one of the most important principles for an encyclopedia is neutrality. This is the idea that Wikipedia itself shouldn't take a stand on any controversial issue. Our job is not to be a place for political commentary or persuasion, but basically just to lay out the landscape for people. So if there's a controversial issue, we try to report neutrally on what relevant and important authorities about it have said. So, take as an example a hot button issue like abortion. Wikipedia, of course, is not going to take a stand on abortion, but it's going to report, that the Catholic Church position is this, and the Pope has said that, and critics have responded this way, and so on. The idea is, so if you're new to the topic and you want to know what everybody's fussing about, you can come and get that landscape. Of course, neutrality is not always easy. We are human beings, and it's serious effort. But that's one of the core principles. Some of the other principles that are really important, things like reliable sourcing. That's something the community has gotten more and more interested in over the years. As the project matures, people have become less tolerant of just some random information that somebody writes down that they happen to know, and really more looking for what's your source for that. Do you have a scientific journal or a well-known newspaper and so on. And in fact, we've gotten very sophisticated in the community with all of our policies around what counts as a reliable source or not.
Can you talk me through that, actually? Because one of the guiding principles, or rather what I've understood to be one of your inspirations for starting Wikipedia, is to create an environment that almost breaks down this ivory tower notion, this idea that there's a hierarchy, that anybody can contribute to knowledge. Yet what you're talking about here with this notion of reliable sources, a scientific journal, a peer-reviewed, can you talk me through that juxtaposition, that sort of, that controversy there?
I mean, it's interesting because Wikipedia in many ways does break down a lot of hierarchical assumptions that people have, but that was never the goal. It's not something I particularly care about one way or the other. What I care about is quality. It turns out that it's easier to get quality when you have more people participating, and when you judge the quality of someone's work on its own merits rather than paying too much attention to their credentials. At the same time, we really love when experts come. We really try to have an environment that's very welcoming of people who know what they're talking about. It's funny because we have this reputation for being very anti-elitist, but we're really not anti-elitist. We're actually quite snobby within the community, based on, if you know what you're talking about and you can back it up, that's honorable, and that's really important to us. So our concepts about quality end up being very old-fashioned in a certain way. We don't regard ourselves as some kind of open free speech forum where every opinion is as valid as every other opinion. We really want good work, good quality work. When we think about what counts as a reliable source, it depends very much on the context. If you're looking at some, if you want to know what Yasser Arafat said, in 2001, the New York Times is a very good source, and that's perfectly valid. If you are writing some very detailed entry about some concept in physics, you really want a physics journal. You want some peer-reviewed material to back it up, not an article in Time magazine. If you want to write about a TV show, then maybe TV Guide is a good source. And again, if you want to write about something very scientific or something very detailed in history, then you wouldn't use TV Guide as a source. So it depends on the context, and the community's been very, very thoughtful at really working through trying to figure out when is something a reliable source, for what, and so on and so forth.
It seems that this is something that's evolved over the years.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, in the early days, we didn't have a lot of policy just because it wasn't necessary. When you start and someone is typing for the first time, Africa is a continent, and hitting save, and that's our first entry on Africa. It's very simple. You don't really need a lot of detailed policy to get started. But then the policy evolves over time. People begin to run into controversies, and then they start to think about, how do we resolve this controversy? How can we write Wikipedia so that it's neutral? And one of the best ways is to say, well, let's reach out to the sources, right? Let's just report on what the valid sources say. So that's been, yeah, it's been something that's grown up over a long period of time.
It seems interesting to me that the variation of the number of Wikipedia pages in the different languages. I mean, in many ways, by creating Wikipedia pages or allowing people to create Wikipedia pages in different languages, you're almost creating those silos that you know, the web is trying to break down. Is that not? How do you make sure that there's cross-pollination between those ideas?
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things that we do, sometimes people ask, you know, do you have a Canadian version of Wikipedia? This is silly, right? We have English, and there are many different varieties of English, of course, but they're all together in the English Wikipedia. And we have the German and French and so on and so forth. And so now we have over 200 different languages. We now have like 175 languages that have 1,000 articles, which is small, you know, but that's still a legitimate project that's getting started. And yeah, we do encourage people to make note of what's going on in other languages, but the only people who can do that are people who are bilingual, who can read in multiple languages, and there are people who do that. One of the reasons English is the largest language is that English is by far the largest language on the internet, and it's the largest second language all around the world. So we see a lot of things like people writing in their native tongue, and then they'll also put it into English. So sometimes people will say, you know, and there's almost nothing you can do to offend a German Wikipedian more than saying, well, how many articles have you translated into, you know? So German Wikipedia, so it's a translation of the English. No, it's not. They wrote it independently. Translation is a small part of what people do. And some people do. They take their time to go and like compare two versions and look for interesting contradictions. You know, one of the classics is, you know, for, well, who invented the airplane?
Well, I suppose in the Western sense, it would be the Wright brothers.
The Wright brothers, right? We were all taught this. All English speakers are taught this when you're, you know, in second grade. The Wright brothers invented the airplane. It's as simple and uncontroversial a fact as that, you know, the moon goes around the Earth. In France, similarly, they are taught just as uncontroversially that some guy from Brazil who was in France, you know, invented the plane. And in fact, the true story is actually there's some validity to both accounts, and you know, it's very complicated. You know, it was like many inventions. It was part of a spirit of the times, and there were a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. And who you assign priority to depends on how you define the first flight, and so on and so forth. And so it turns out that, you know, at some point, somebody from French Wikipedia noticed. They said, "Wow, look, English Wikipedia and French Wikipedia are completely different on this point." And then in the English Wikipedia, people sort of went back and looked at it and studied the history more, and now the English Wikipedia has a much more nuanced story in the history of aviation. You know, it sort of explains there are many competing claims, and here's the different achievements that different people did, and then you get a much richer idea. So I think that kind of cross-cultural pollination is really important and really valid to help us all move beyond second grade.
Well, the danger, though, is that because there are so many English language accounts, that these are the people who are actually contributing the knowledge. They're the people who own the knowledge. They're the sort of the elites, as it were, on Wikipedia because they have this knowledge. And if people first come to the English page, then they're only getting that information from that point of view without realizing that perhaps they themselves could contribute to it.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people do contribute, and particularly for English Wikipedia, as I said, because English is the largest second language around the world, it tends to be very multicultural. I once was in Lithuania meeting with, I had a meeting with the head of parliament there, and he's a lovely guy who is really into encyclopedias. He was on the board of an encyclopedia project there. And when I went in, he had printed out an entry on a famous battle that happened some 100 years ago between Lithuania and Poland. And he said, and he could read English, Lithuanian, Polish, and German. He had printed all four. And he said the German version was just quite small. There wasn't much to be said about it. The Lithuanian version was from the Lithuanian perspective, and the Polish version was from the Polish perspective. But then he said the English version was really fabulous, and it looked to him like the Lithuanians and the Poles had come together there to fight about it and sort of reach some compromise. And then we later went and looked, and that's exactly what had happened. And then people, from there went back into the Lithuanian version, the Polish version, and those began to mature over time. So these kinds of things, English is an interesting language. It's kind of a melting pot language. But we're really very focused on people writing in their mother tongue. In India, for example, there's been a situation in India for a long time where obviously English is a very important language for the elites in India. There's over 20 different languages in India. And in order to communicate with each other, they can use Hindi, many people, or English, as the elites tend to do. And what's happening, though, is that a lot of the people there who are on the internet, they're using English a lot, but they really have a great passion for their mother tongue. And so now they're beginning and they're working in Canada, Bengali, all of the different languages of India. And those are growing very quickly. So that's something we're very excited about.